Good evening, everybody. Today we have a talk by our past president, Mike Pafford, who's going to talk to us about lean startup methods and agile Scrum for collaborative initial project planning. A small thing about Mike, he was 20-year-old Incose member, former US Air Force multiple language analyst, US Navy cryptographer, and intelligence system lead engineer. Question I had to ask you, you were there in all three services.
Yep. Yeah.
So anyway, he's going to talk to us about this, and it's going to be interesting. Thank you.
Okay, am I on, Bill? I guess I am. You all can hear me. Yeah, it's on. Good. Thanks very much, everybody. Okay, well, I'm again Mike Pafford. For those of you all I haven't met yet, and I was the president last year. Thanks a lot to the chapter for letting me talk with everyone tonight about how I've been using best practices from the Lean Startup method. Who here has heard of the Lean Startup method? Okay, and Agile Scrum product backlog item development. Who here has done any of that? Agile Scrum product backlog item development. Now I've been using a hybrid approach, best practice from both of those, not the whole Agile Scrum process, to facilitate the development of initial work items for system solution projects, any project. I facilitated this hybrid approach with a government computer science and software engineering research team to improve their second release of an enterprise software inspection tool. And I've used it with a cross-domain engineering and management team who were starting a model-based systems engineering project to develop a microgrid reference model for Cuyahoga County, Ohio. So you'll see that particular example a couple of times. Now you'll notice I use QR codes. I use QR codes on a lot of my slides. Anyone with a good QR reader might be able to read it from their seat and get the information that's on any one of those slides. So if anybody wants to, I've tested it. It works fine in a conference room. It works fine in a classroom. And I think one person has actually been able to capture the large one here. So you'll see this QR code, excuse me, on some more slides, and feel free to capture the information if you can. This is where you can get the slides for the talk. Anybody that's an Incose member can, of course, go into Incose Connect in the object-oriented systems engineering method working group site and get all of the slides that I've used for all of the workshops, all of the slides for all of the workshops. And those that aren't members can get the information for tonight's presentation. There's a PDF of the slide and another PDF of the slides and the notes in Dropbox. So feel free to go and get that information. Who here has not seen this cartoon? This cartoon is 20 years old, believe it or not. It's actually 20 years old. And as some people may know, it's actually in Incose Handbook 4 now. But it is the real motivation behind why I give these educational workshops. As you can see, that we don't have time to gather these product requirements ahead of time. I want you to start designing the product anyway. Otherwise, it'll look like we aren't accomplishing anything. And of course, he says, of all my projects, I like the doomed ones best. And here is the tragic reality. This is a 21-year-old cartoon. But we all know how relevant it still is. So here are the topics I'm going to go over. The topics I'm going to go over this evening is I'm going to introduce you to a microgrid reference model, model-based systems engineering project. Very quickly, this project is in coordination with the Critical Infrastructure Protection and Recovery Working Group, the CIPR Working Group. Mark Walker is one of the co-chairs of that working group, and we're working with the Critical Infrastructure Protection and Recovery Working Group. We're working with the Object-Oriented Systems Engineering Method Working Group. We're working with IEEE, and we're working with the FBI's InfraGard organization, starting a project to come up with to use model-based systems engineering to come up with a reference model for that can be used for any instantiation of a microgrid. The Lean Startup methods and Agile Scrum workshops for collaborative initial planning for this microgrid reference model MBSE project. You'll see me go over that also. So very quickly, the microgrid reference model MBSE project, as I was just talking about, is initial coordination between Incose, CIPR working group, its USM working group, IEEE, and FBI InfraGard. Ideas discussed to collaboratively develop a CIPR-related product or service. Ideas have been refined into model-based systems engineering to develop a microgrid reference model, specifically to begin with, for Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Initial LSM and Agile workshop, I facilitated one on July the 8th of 2017. And so the decision that came out of that was a microgrid reference model MBSE project. And I've had three educational workshops after that, held from July to September, to develop the initial work items for this project. And down at the bottom, you'll see the reference model definition that's being used by the folks working on this project. This is the roadmap. This is the simple concept model. It's called a concept model, illustrating at a very high level the inputs, processes, and outputs of the microgrid reference model MBSE project. Now, I'll be concentrating in this briefing on the inputs, process steps, and outputs of the Lean Startup method and Agile Scrum process steps by the planning team that they use for their initial project planning. The primary outputs from this collaborative use of these particular techniques would be a set, and this is my first foot stomper here. Just as an aside, I teach for the Johns Hopkins University in their Master's in Systems Engineering program, so I may use the term foot stomp every once in a while. The main outputs from this work is a set of vetted project focus mechanisms. That's a big point. The project focus mechanisms that any planning team can then use throughout any project to guide life cycle development. And so that's the niche that I guess I've been working on. For those who might not already be familiar with the Lean Startup method, it's also called the Lean Launchpad project planning methodology. And here's some introductory information on that. So it's called, like I said, it's also called Lean Launchpad. It's a philosophy and methodology based way back in the 1980s, lean manufacturing, a learnable and shareable stakeholder-centric method to quickly, collaboratively, and iteratively develop a new product or service or update existing products or services. It's developed in its current form by the American entrepreneur Eric Ries, founder and CEO of the Long-Term Stock Exchange, and he's a former student of Steve Blank, who pioneered the Lean Startup movement with his customer development concept. So understanding the customer and their feedback are at the center of this initial project planning hybrid approach. Now, one note I need to make here is, although there have always been some overlaps in techniques and tools, it's important to know that Lean Startup Method, or LSM, is not the same as Lean. It's not the same as Lean Project Management or Lean Engineering or Lean Systems Engineering. The Lean Startup Method techniques are meant to help quickly and collaboratively prove out the feasibility of a product or service, and it's used to enhance and improve the initial planning of any project by creating this set of project focus mechanisms. After that, the project can be plan-driven, waterfall, agile, lean, or whatever, but they still can all benefit from going through this hybrid approach to get their initial work items and their project focus mechanisms. So here's who's using Lean Startup for initial project planning, and I'm sure that we can all recognize a lot of these folks here. The National Science Foundation, if you look, they use it probably more than anyone. It's called I-Core. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is now using it, and was one of the first government organizations to let a contract that was a fixed price per sprint contract. National Security Agency is actually adopting the I-Core. The Office of Naval Research, the State Department, the U.S. government FedTech, which is NASA's version of I-Core. And on the industry side, we see folks like Dropbox, Wealthfront, Grocket, InView, Vodafone, and Aardvark. And again, you'll see if you can get it, this QR code right here. You're of course welcome to go onto the Dropbox side of the Connect site and get this information. But if you can get the information through a QR code, help yourself. This is a very important a slide that I try to show. This is a very good slide done by Bill Schindel. You all know him. A lot of you all know him already. Bill Schindel from the Incose Systems Engineering Patterns Working Group, and Rick Dove of the Incose Agile Systems Engineering Working Group. And they have a series of these activity. Well, actually, it's like a sequence diagram or an activity diagram with swim lanes. But you can see that the focus of my research and my educational workshops is at the very beginning of this Agile Scrum project lifecycle, where it says stakeholders, including customers, planning project, initiate product backlog, project initiated. One of the big questions that I always get when I work with folks that are trying to do Agile Scrum, for example, they'll say, I think I understand the processes behind Agile Scrum, but what is this product backlog that everything seems to start with, and where does that come from? And so that really, again, is the area that I've been concentrating on. And you'll see that it's not a trivial amount of work to actually create a good product backlog item set and initial work items and these project focus mechanisms that you can use for the duration of any project. And we're going to start, and just to let you know, this work is actually a series of face-to-face workshops that can take a fairly good amount of time, but of course they're worth it. But what you're going to get from me tonight is just the 1 hour run through of what takes place at these workshops. So the approach has proven itself out, as I said, so far in 2 real-world face-to-face workshops totaling about 20 hours each for the initial project planning of the Government Research Software Improvement Project and for the Cuyahoga County Microgrid Reference Model Project. And I've practiced it with other groups in several other educational workshops. You all may have been a couple of them. I had one here in December of 2015. I had another one at SEDC 2016. And then in July of 2016, I had the all-day workshop at Southern Maryland. I did an all-day workshop down there. And I've given the workshop a couple of other times since then. And I'm planning on giving it a few more times this year. So I'm going to first concentrate on this block, the first block here, which we're all familiar with: abstract, plain language, problems, issues, needs, scenarios, and stuff that we get from our stakeholders. Who here is familiar with this exercise? Is called the 6 hats. You've probably done this before. This is, again, part of the hybrid approach that I use, because it has been found to be very useful in the lean startup. A lot of the small companies or companies wanting to get started with a project very quickly have found that this is a useful exercise. And so in my educational workshops, this is the flip chart exercise that we do. So in the first microgrid reference model MBSE project planning workshop, we tried to include as many of the main project perspectives as we could to bring them together. This was the initial project planning team, Everyone was assigned certain hats, meant to make sure that all primary project perspectives represented by the planning team members were represented throughout all other initial project planning workshop process steps. So these are some of the examples of the hats that we use for the microgrid reference model MBSE project. Now, when assigning these hats, some of the people in the project planning team were asked to do a little bit of a stretch. And just like as systems engineers, we're asked to do that a lot. That is, to choose a hat that might not be their exact real-life role and responsibility. But again, the objective was to make sure that as many primary project perspectives as possible were represented throughout the initial project planning process. Everyone was asked to try to think like their workshop hats through the entire workshop, but also be ready to offer insights or help to anyone wearing a hat for this workshop that they might normally wear in real life. You know, if somebody is actually doing a little bit of a stretch, but one of the other hats knows that role and responsibility, they were asked to give some help there. So then for this particular project, and if I haven't mentioned it before, I think it's important to mention it now. If I haven't mentioned it before, all of the Lean Startup method, Agile Scrum process steps can be accomplished, at least initially, without any special software tools whatsoever. All of the steps first employ brainstorming, affinity mapping, that is writing on flip charts and whiteboards or on stickies, and then you put those on the whiteboard. At every workshop, the planning team used these methods to first get it down on paper. That's important, on the whiteboard or on the flip charts. Then we took pictures of the flip charts or the whiteboard. And then we used those pictures for the next process step. Then we repeated all the process steps until all the tasks were completed. The slide shows, again, the flip chart hats exercise that I facilitated so that the planning team could make sure that it was starting off with inputs from the right perspectives. This wasn't all of the microgrid reference model project stakeholders, but it did ensure that the right makeup of the project planning team. So this set of hats constituted the first project focus mechanism. And that's a big point that I want to make here, is that you're building this set of project focus mechanisms. Here's a quick look at the results of another flip chart exercise we did at the workshop, where the hats agreed on the project title and the project purpose statements and actually got those down on paper too. They vetted them, they discussed them as much as they needed to, but they got them down on paper. So this became their second project focus mechanism to be used through the rest of the microgrid reference model MBSE project planning process steps. Remembering that the first project focus mechanism were the hats themselves. So this is the second mechanism that they capture. So now I'll go into the review of the main Lean Startup method or Agile Scrum product backlog item development process steps, overall characterized by the inputs, process, and outputs inside this red dot here, box here. Keep in mind that the full set of hybrid LSM and Agile Scrum process steps would normally be carried out in a series of collaborative workshops. We did our workshops face to face, but we're experimenting with how much of it we might be able to do with a collaboration tool also. Here, this is a single slide that I've always used for the past couple of years as a high-level illustration of these main LSM Agile Scrum initial project planning process steps. Again, the main value of using this approach is to ensure that the right planning team agrees on the right project title and purpose, develops a right set of vetted project focus mechanisms, including the right set of initial work items to get the project right from the start. It's also, as I heard a term used the other day, to start slow, learn fast. Start slow, learn fast. So if you put this effort into the beginning of an integrated master schedule, you actually make time for this, you go through these affinity mapping and brainstorming sessions, you will find that in the big scheme of your schedule, you very quickly will be able to capture these focus mechanisms that you can use for the remainder of the project. And these focus mechanisms are especially important these days whenever you're doing agile, straight agile, or even a hybrid agile, because everyone here knows, I mean, you could probably recite it along with me, what the basic definition of agile is. It's iterative development for incremental delivery of value. And that is really, in a nutshell, what agile is. There's all different kinds of branches of that, but it's iterative development for incremental value, delivery of value. And so you're going to revisit every time box, every iteration is there to try and to accommodate change. And so that's why these focus mechanisms are so powerful in an agile or a hybrid agile type project. You can very easily have them at the ready to where you can keep referring back to them during the entire system development lifecycle. And now we're going to go, I'm going to kind of go into each one of these very quickly, go into each one of these. And so the first process step of this hybrid approach involves the initial project planning team leveraging those first two project focus mechanisms. That means the perhaps or the perspectives and their title and purpose statements. They leverage those to together validate the problem and vision on how to approach this product or service that they're going to try to do in the case of the microgrid reference model. Inputs come from the first two focus mechanisms and from experience-based insights from all of the various project planning team member perspectives or hats. This is where we start full-blown whiteboard-based brainstorming. The main output of this LSM Agile process step is the next or third vetted project focus mechanism. In Lean Startup, it's called the Product Vision Board Extended. Has anybody here ever done a product, anything like this so far? This is big. That list I gave you of all of those different organizations, another organization that's not listed there that you probably heard of is the Department of Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, or DODIUX. That's become very important to the government right now. They've been out to Silicon Valley more times than they really want to, maybe. But the DIUX has brought this back, and NSF I-Corps has really picked up on it, and TechNet, FedTech has picked up on it, and some other organizations has picked up on this. But this is an important step in Lean Startup, is this Product Vision Board Extended. And so this is what I've been talking about. Imagine sliding pizza under the door type workshops where you just do a lot of these things. And this is a picture of the whiteboard-based brainstorming session that created the PVBE, Product Vision Board Extended, for the Microgrid Reference Model MBSE project. And this was about a couple of hours worth of work with those hats. And this is the cleaned up version of that. Here's a cleaned up after action version of the Product Vision Board Extended. This illustrates the capability for the planning team to discover, capture, record, report, and share some of the right project information right away. There are a growing number of repository-based project-related tools out there now in which these cleaned up artifacts can be readily captured, shared, and used. And you may have seen that you may have noticed that on you might have noticed that on this one. Can be shared in tools like Atlassian's Confluence. Does anybody here know about the Atlassian tools? It's a good thing as you do, because last July, I went to San Jose to the Atlassian Summit. And the Atlassian Summit were 3,600 people from 42 different countries there for the purpose of telling each other all about the Atlassian tools. And I went out there, of course, to confirm what I knew already, was that the Atlassian tool called Confluence it's a wiki-based tool that I thought, and they confirmed while I was out there, would be very useful for systems engineers to get to be good at, because the Atlassian Confluence tool is hardwired to the Atlassian Jira tool. And Jira, as we know, is a primary component to most integrated development environments for software-intensive system solutions these days. And I did notice when I got out there that for the first time, I was part of the 1%. I was part of the 1% of the people over 30 years old. It was amazing. It was wonderful. It was and the other thing I really liked was I would say a 50-50 split between young men and young women that were out there that were software developers. For the most part, they were software developers and software engineers and software project managers. And they were all using the Atlassian tools. And so I had some really great conversations out there, and they were glad to see me. I wore my Incose stuff, and they were glad to see me. But this is an example, just an example of the kind of a wiki-based tool that all of this information can be captured in. This information is captured like this. It's sort of cleaned up like this, and then it can go into one of those tools. So that term, the Product Vision Board Extended, is, let's just call it the third project focus mechanism for this project team. So the next process step enables a project planning team to discover and begin capturing together a fourth project focus mechanism, which is a set of stakeholder groups, otherwise called persona, in Lean Startup called persona, templates or cards for the project. The project focus mechanisms developed so far, as we've had, is the HATS perspective, the project title and the purpose statements, the product vision board extended, And all three of these focus mechanisms are now leveraged by the project planning team to develop this fourth project focus mechanism, the persona templates. And here are the beginning of that work that we did. Here's a picture of the results of the project planning team's persona development whiteboard brainstorming session. In this step, each one of the hats uses their experience to come up with project stakeholder groups or personas. During this step, each stakeholder group or persona role and responsibility is actually given a name. You'll see that they're given a name here, all the way through here. Every one of these roles and responsibilities or these personas that represent a user group is actually given a name. And what's not shown here, I'll show it to you in a minute, is not only are they given a name, but they're given a picture, a cartoon type picture. Because believe it or not, LSM studies, many studies have shown that project team members are actually more productive when focusing their work during a software development lifecycle project toward a captured and recorded persona rather than trying to remember stakeholders as they go along. They actually, when they do their review of their iterations, and they do their retrospectives, and they do their iteration meetings and that type of thing, they actually say that in answer to the question, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? They can actually very quickly, going back to a tool like Confluence and Jira, they can actually go back and say, well, we said that these people, they actually refer to them as people, that these people were primary stakeholders in what we're doing. And so it's another focus mechanism is this list right here. And this is just the same list, but we did a good job in one of the workshops on just turning that into kind of a hierarchy chart. But it is the same persona list. And this is an example. And this is an example of a whiteboard session in which one of those persona examples from that list was further detailed in what's called persona template or persona cards. Now, another thing I learned at the Atlassian Summit, you can actually go on the internet now, and you can, if you're lucky, you can get them for free, but you can certainly purchase these persona cards. They're actually real cards like, I don't know, how many of us here still do Pokemon? Well, my daughter grew up on it. Well, Digimon, you name it, Yu-Gi-Oh, and all that kind of stuff. But you can appreciate that the people that we're talking about that are the real hotshot software engineers and so on, they're not too far removed from that. And so you can actually, and it's an excellent focus mechanism that you can actually get a deck of cards. You can actually get a deck of cards that do represent these personas. And there are a lot of detail on these things. Now, and the reason they came out was, as you all know, in software development for a very long time, they've had in their integrated development environment the idea of patterns, libraries, and catalogs. That's a big deal that we in the systems engineering world, some of our working groups are trying to get us all educated better on this idea of patterns and catalogs and libraries. Well, that's where these persona cards came from, is the idea of the software engineers expecting to find these patterns and catalogs and libraries somewhere. And this is a cleaned up version of it. This is a cleaned up version of the persona template or persona card, as it might be stored in a collaboration tool such as the ones we were talking about before. And this becomes a very important set of focus mechanisms. So to review, the focus mechanism one, so you're building this good group of focus mechanisms. So focus mechanism one were those hats or perspectives. Then we had the project title and the purpose. Then we had the product vision board extended that we captured that. Then we had the persona list and the persona hierarchy that I just showed you. Now we have this set of persona templates or persona cards. And all of these are meant to be project focus mechanisms that can be referred back to at any time during a system development lifecycle project. Moving on to the next process step is for the project team to use those 5 project focus mechanisms that I just listed to now start to narrow down together what it is the team wants the microgrid reference model or any other project to actually create, what product or service. The persona templates or persona cards, I'm going to make some points here. The persona templates and persona cards are the project focus mechanism for all product stakeholder groups. The product canvas that you see now is a project focus mechanism for the product details. So we have a focus mechanism for the product stakeholder groups, and now we have a focus mechanism for the product details themselves. Now this product canvas would become now the 6th project focus mechanism for any project. And here is an example again of the work that I'll try not to say it too many times, but the work that Mark Walker and some other folks, they really did a lot of good work together on this. The slide is a picture of the whiteboard session in which the microgrid reference model MBSE project planning team worked together to build this product canvas. Now, I'll make these points in another way. The product vision board extended is a project focus mechanism for the problem, project environment, and the vision. The persona templates are the focus mechanism for the stakeholder groups. And the product canvas, again, is a focus mechanism for the actual product or service details. This slide shows the final 2 Lean Startup method and Agile Scrum product backlog item development process steps. It borrows best practices from software engineering that you all may know about, user story workshops, and story mapping. Anybody here been involved in user story mapping or user story building and that type of thing? Very powerful, very, very useful bridge, I would call it, a bridge methodology between strict software engineering, software development, and all other types of engineering. This idea of story mapping and user story workshops. This enables a project planning team to finalize a consensus set of initial work items for any project. In our case, it was the microgrid reference model project. The team again leverages the HATS perspective, the project title and purpose, the product vision board extended, the persona list. They have all of these things at their ready. The persona list and its hierarchy, the persona templates and cards, and the product canvas. Now they all have these captured, and they build off of each one of those to build a set of system solution, in this case scenarios, which we're familiar with, workflows, high-level user stories that the Agile Scrum folks call epics, use cases that we're familiar with, and capabilities lists. And that group constitutes the 7th and final project focus mechanism for really any project, and in our case, the microgrid reference model project. So here is the slide of a picture of the affinity mapping session in which the project planning team used this approach and used user story mapping to develop a set of high-level microgrid reference model user stories, or epics, part of a set of artifacts making up the 7th and final project focus mechanism for this project. And this is just a cleaned up example of that. And these are called titled initial work items, or epics, or as you can probably see them also as a capabilities list. These high-level titled initial work items, or epics, were themselves used as focus mechanisms for the team to develop a microgrid reference model project set of user scenarios, use cases, capabilities list, and more detailed user stories. Now, as you know, those that are not software engineers can take all of this information and go to march through their normal functions and requirements and specifications, and away they go. And on the software side, they use this information to go through functions and features and tasks and software. So this slide shows an example set of vetted microgrid reference model MBSE project initial work items arranged according to which work items the team thought that the system development team would accomplish during each of the first 3 project iteration time boxes. Again, borrowed from Agile and Agile Scrum. So they took these epics, and in some cases, they went down one more layer, but then they put them in a workflow. They put them in a workflow manner, and they put them in which one of the detailed user stories under each one of them would be done first and second iteration and that type of thing, just like they do, as we know they do in Agile Scrum. So here's some of the, here's a few of the model-based systems engineering, Lean Startup method, and Agile Scrum references that I've used in this initial project in these workshops. Now the first one here, this MBSE book, Don't Panic, The Absolute Beginner's Guide to Model-Based Systems Engineering. These two fellows here are Incose UK chapter members. And I've been in contact with them, and just so you know, sometime this year, we're going to have a combined Incose and IEEE one-day workshop that is this book. We're just going to take this book, which is a very small book, a very nice book, but it's a very small book, but we're going to actually take that book. They've already sent me all of the figures and the images from that book, and they said they're happy for us to use them. So we're actually going to offer a one-day workshop to go through this book right here. So stand by for that information on that later on. I'm working with my IEEE colleagues to get that put together. A Lean Startup Method book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. If anybody wants to see it, I have a copy of it here this evening. If anybody wants to see that book, it's a very, very good book. And then there's the Lean Product Playbook by Dan Olson, another very good Lean Startup Method book. And this Agile Project Management book, Agile Project Management with Scrum by Roman Pichler, a German systems engineer. Very, very, even though it's a tiny bit dated, this is an actual very small book again, a very thin and small book that you're going to see a lot of the work that you may have noticed in some of my slides. It says Roman Pichler. A lot of the the templates that I showed are actually his templates that you can download from his site for free. They're downloadable PDF. So you can download these templates from his site, from Pichler's site, Roman Pichler's site, and you can actually use them right away as far as building some of these artifacts that I just talked about. And then this Agile User Story book, this User Story Mapping is a wonderful book. So User Story Mapping, discover the whole story, build the right product. The first edition, that Patton's book is very good as far as user story mapping, because again, I use that as a wonderful bridge methodology between what the software folks are doing and what the non-software folks like us have been doing to come up with high-level user stories that we might take into functions and requirements, and the software folks will take into functions and features and continue on with the software part of it. But it's a common methodology. So thanks a lot again. I really appreciate you letting me run through this hybrid approach that I've been using as far as facilitating this development of initial work items. The last thing I guess I'll say is that we are going to have this workshop, but I'm
that and understand
Yes.
from different perspectives.
Right. Now, it's also a very important point that you're inferring here also, Mark, is that the reason that we try to, and we're not trying to whinge or concatenate or to take too few hours, but the difference that an important thing that we found out is the difference between the perspectives and the stakeholders. The initial project planning team and the perspectives that they bring, they need to be decision makers. They need to be decision makers that have agreed to take that much time. So you can see where that might be, that would be a challenge. That will be, in some places that's a challenge, but it's the best for the initial project planning team to bring their perspectives, and then they can identify if they're very good SMEs or project managers or other kind of decision makers, they can actually create all of this stuff that we saw here. We had a very small set of people that were real subject matter experts and could talk for that organization, and they were able to list all the other stakeholders and come up with all the other artifacts. So you need to get decision makers, and you need to use as little, because their time is hard to get. So you need to get to try to get them to have it scripted and you have the process down to where you can march them through and facilitate them through fairly easy. Which is the last point I want to make on that is the idea of facilitator. It is real important that, and a systems engineer is going to be asked to do this. So one of us is going to be asked to do it. But you really will get the most out of this if you don't have one of the perspectives or hats trying to be the facilitator also. You need somebody that's familiar enough with it that can actually do the role of the facilitator and march everybody else through all these process steps.
Audience has a question?
Mike, I wasn't familiar with the 6 hats methods, but I understood. However, when you got to the stakeholders, I was a little confused between what are the 6 hats doing and what's the stakeholder.
Yep.
Using that term.
Yep, and that's really what I was trying to go over just now, Steve, because that is an important point. The 6 hats should be decision makers, and they could turn out to be, one or more of them could turn out to be a stakeholder also, and it does happen that they turn out to be a stakeholder too. But the stakeholder is the person that while you're in the system development life cycle, they really are the other workers, like the software developer, the architect, the systems engineer that's doing the architect, the software engineer that's doing the software development, the IT person, the maintenance person. Those are all very more targeted, tailored subject matter experts. But neither of those targeted or tailored subject matter experts would be able to do what the hats are expected to do, which is that they have a broader idea of the organization. So the people that you need to bring together need to be able to say, oh yeah, I have these stakeholders working for me, so they go on the list. I have these stakeholders working for me. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to be intimately involved when the time comes, but the difference between a hat and a stakeholder is in order for this to be most productive, is the hats need to be the ones that have the stakeholders literally working for them. So that's the difference. And that's really how it makes it most productive. Because you can have one hat named 6 different stakeholders, but if you had one of those 6 stakeholders there, they may not know anybody else.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Mike, for a lot. How you doing, Mike? So, and maybe it's buried in here, but can you kind of clarify, talk about, again, on anything that we're trying to solve, defining the problem is always the first thing you want to do, right? And how is your methodology different or attacking in this than Scrum and others, or which is kind of an iterative, hey, here's what I've got, and what do you think? Here's what I got. What do you think? With an intense customer involvement. How is this different? Or
I would say one of the main ways it's different, Dave, is that it's not looking forward. It's not looking forward all the time. For example, if you start with your product backlog item set, if you start with that set, then planning the next sprint, and you're doing the next sprint, and you're retrospecting on that sprint, and you're calculating your burn rate and all the things you did during that iteration with an eye on the next sprint. Everything, you're always looking forward. This actually brings the perspectives to an offsite type and say, okay, we're not in the process yet. We don't even know what kind of process we're going to use. We're not forward looking. We're in the moment right now to try to identify what it is what is the problem, what are the stakeholders, what are the details that we want to do. It's what are the different things we need all the time, and really no thought about what needs to be done next. And so that it's a very good offsite type way to gather all the information in the initial work items that any plan-driven, agile, lean, or any other project will take, and now start to look down the sequence or forward to the next iteration, and so on and so forth.
Just a follow-up, does your problem definition have essentially say, here's the outcomes I'm looking for that are very specific in this case, in terms of how do you know I've solved the problem? Not so much the product side, but on the solving the problem side.
One more time.
Are you looking at on the problem side, is this offsite really, is it also focused on how do I know I've solved the problem? Not so much designing the product, but in terms of the what is the problem and how do I know I've solved it once I've gone through all this stuff?
No, this is not any of that. This is not any of that, Dave. This is a characterization of what we think we're in for with this project. What we think we're in for with this project.
So it's solution focused.
It's not. It's not solution focused at all. It's really. You'll see that when you go through the artifacts, Dave, when you go through the hats, when you go through the title and the purpose, and you go through the product vision, board extended, and the stakeholder groups, and the where you see your product or service in the big scheme of things on the product canvas, and then you start to build your epics and so on. You'll notice that none of that really. You build a lot of useful artifacts without the solution sort of being mentioned hardly at all. You'll see that you don't mention the solution very much.
One thing that confuses me is terminology. So if I could use an analogy, if I use the JSIDs
oh yes,
as an analogy, so the operational people come up with.
Yep.
And then you've got a whole other project team who tries to provide that need.
Right, exactly. Well, what we're talking about the initial work of that IPT or project team. We're talking about their initial work. We're talking about their work to get to the capabilities level, get to the capabilities level, and really, you create enough artifacts or focus mechanisms at the capabilities level that you can declare a win as far as using this systems engineering approach to get to that point. So you can see that you built a lot of useful artifacts in just the initial piece of work that IPT or project team would do. Then all the rest of that is still to be done, but with a fairly decent set of focus mechanisms.
It's the jump start for really puts the project team in gives them something to do because you've told them what it's all about.
Yes.
You've told them some of the things that you need to have done. And
yes.
Gives them something assignments.
Yes.
And then they take it from there.
All right, so
when you get that all done with the Scrum, you come back at some point and say, where's my backlog?
Well, you do that with Scrum a lot, but you can also take that set of artifacts and move into the JSIDs process or the capabilities to requirements, the specs, and so on and so forth. I have found that you're more productive in those steps because you've done this. Even in a plan-driven waterfall project, you'll wind up being more productive in your subsequent requirements analysis, requirements engineering steps if you've done these, if you've taken the time to do these steps. Now, and that includes, that includes in these steps, you do review together the ConOps in an abstract way. You do review scenarios, you do review high-level user stories and that type of thing. So you do have subject matter experts there that are pretty familiar with what the solution could be. But this helps them create a set of initial work items that should make them more productive when they move into the actual solution development stages. It's not that you ignore, you ignore the fact that we need a solution here, but I think it gives you a fairly good set of high-level artifacts that should make your subsequent steps more productive.
Mike, I'm curious about, from the perspective of MBSE, whether there's any backup and learning changes that MBSE processes and techniques might gain from this effort.
Well, George, is a very good question, and let's see, I'm going to try to go back to a slide here that I think will help point that out real quick. This one, and Mark knows about this because we've gone through this. For example, speaking for myself, this is what comes out of this. What comes out of this process. I'm taking that information and I'm doing the next NBSE step of putting it into the object process methodology tool. Is anybody here familiar with OPM? It's a new specification. Dove Dory is one that made it into a specification. I think it's dated December 2016. It's very recent. But that is a model-based systems engineering targeted specifically at the concept definition phase. That's what this is. This is model-based systems engineering for concept definition. And so I'm working on that one. At the same time, Mark and some other people were working with Sandy Friedenthal and some other people, and they're taking this information and they're putting it, and so my work, I get high-level product or service concept models out of here, and this is an MBSE process right here, kind of a new MBSE process that will feed into, let's say, the current MBSE processes that are based, for example, on the object-oriented systems engineering method MBSE methodology based on SysML, or there's some other object-oriented systems engineering methods that are still based on UML. So this output here can go straight into model-based systems engineering that's based on SysML or UML, or it can take this route here and get you a more formal type concept definition using this new MBSE route that I'm investigating right now. So it's MBSE this way, a new kind of MBSE, but it does provide direct and immediate usable input into the existing MBSE tools that are out there. I just didn't brief this because we're not at that point yet. We're still working on that. Yes, Kurt.
Okay, I'm looking at the output of this being essentially the backlog for development.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm thinking that between this and the backlog for development, it might be worthwhile to have a similar type of process for software architecture that focuses on the solution, since you haven't focused on the solution.
That's right.
Rather than going straight into a development mode where they're kind of making up the architecture as they go.
Well, if you don't mind, Kurt, I couldn't agree with you more, and not to give you any alibis or anything, but there really is an Incose working group that's looking at that, and so we are looking at that, and also not only just as I mentioned a while ago, that we could take this information and go on the non-software side down through capabilities, functions, requirements, and specs, and away we go. And on the software side, we can go down through these user stories into functions and features and software. We can do that. But we know we can also at the same time, and we can put them through these MBSE tools, but at the same time, another step after this step right here, another step is most certainly software intensive architecture and non-software intensive architecture. And I'm looking right at Bob Sigolito when I say that, because he's as interested in the, let's call it the non-software architecture, as you're an expert, a subject matter expert in the software-based architecture. So most certainly that is the case. Now what you see coming out of here is these two for MBSE, but there's another line out of here for the normal capabilities to functions to requirements to spec, and another line out of here for the capabilities to functions to features to software, another line out of here for software intensive architecture, and another line out of here for non-software intensive architecture. Most certainly is the case. But they all can benefit. They all can benefit from having this set of focus mechanisms. I think they can all benefit from that. They'll all be more productive.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Very good talk. You get a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Is there nothing left? I think I'll give you this.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Well, thanks very much, Chandra.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Really
Now. Yep, of course, Chandra. Thank you very much. Oh.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Okay. All right, y'all. Thanks very much, y'all.